Hello everyone, welcome to app number 6 of Lair. As you can see today I'm in a different place. The background is not the same. I have this, for those of you who know what this is where I'm at. I'm in Lisbon. I flew to Portugal a couple of days ago to give some rest of that pandemic the kind of feeling that is happening in London at the moment, to have some time off. Let's call it like this. Let some time off with my family, visit some friends. But of course, the first 2 weeks we don't get to do anything because we have to be in quarantine, and that's exactly what we're doing as a family. We are quarantined in a house that we've been a few times. Every time we come to Lisbon, we tend to stay in the same place, and this is where we are. And this is a place in Lisbon, that picture over there, for those of you who know. First of all, I'd like to start the show today by thanking every single one of you that sent me messages, all the follows, all the massive support that I received this week in particular. Thank you very much. I didn't get back to every one of you, but I will just get back to people. It might take me a while because I might be busy with something else, but thank you very much. Very much appreciated your support, and as you know, I'm doing this for you, so if there's that support, thank you, and thank you for all the suggestions as well. It's been really amazing, especially this past week. A lot of subscriptions on my YouTube channel, so thank you very much. What else as a new thing? We have a bot in our chat. I'm just going to switch it to the chat now. Maybe there will be someone called Nightbot. That's the bot of the channel. This is something new for this week, and you can interact with the bot. It just helps me to, if I'm forgetting something in terms of information that I would like to give you, or if you have any questions, if they're repeated questions, you can always count with the bot to ask those questions. I'm not too sure if it's really working. Hopefully it is. Let's take a look if we have any. No, the bot seems like it's still asleep. Don't know. If you type question mark more, you might wake up. Give it a try. If it helps. I'm not too sure. I tried it a few times. It seemed like it was working. Not too sure if it's working now. I should see a message at the moment, but I don't see any. So maybe it's not working. But with time, it will for sure. Not question mark, but exclamation mark. Sorry, my bad. Exclamation mark. So what else? Pandemic updates. As I just mentioned, I'm in Lisbon now. I have to say that it was almost like a surreal experience coming here, because the airport was basically completely empty. I've never seen anything like that happen. It was like an entire airport, Stansted in this case, with just 2 flights, I believe for the entire day, at least for the entire morning. And those 2 flights were coming actually to the same place, which was Portugal, different locations though. And it was kind of surreal because all the shops were closed, of course. So there was no one apart from the passengers that would embark at some point on those flights. So it was kind of a surreal feeling, to be honest, because even people working there, it was just like a few. But they actually were offering gloves to everyone, which is something that I've never seen happening in London in any shop or anything like that. Of course, it's an airport. I know that we have to have special conditions for that. But it was kind of a surreal moment, I have to say. And then when I arrived in Portugal, the rules seemed like, and the overall feeling really seems like very, very different. The shops are all of them open. Not like malls and all that stuff. They're not open yet, but all the shops, like traditional commerce and all that stuff, All of that is open to the public, and it's mandatory that if you want to go inside to wear a mask, which is something that doesn't happen in London, which is really weird. Why is it not mandatory, even though London is in such a bad shape, as we all know? I don't know. It seems like every country is following their own rules with their own kind of data. Not the data in terms of like deaths or sick people. No, that's not the data. It's data in terms of science, it seems. It's really weird. Anyway, in terms of what's happening in London at the moment, so the update is the schools were open for the first years, including nurseries, this week. So this is already something that parents will benefit from, because they will have some quality time, whether it's to work or to spend some time with their wives or husbands or partners, or alone, because working and being with the kid every day, as much as we love them, it's really hard work. And I have a kid, so I know what I'm talking about. Other than that, it's more about the other shops that will open in London. I believe it's for the next week. From next week, I think they will open. I'm not too sure. If anyone could confirm, that would be great. But I think or from the 15th, I'm not too sure. Anyway, it seems also that I already read some things that in London or in the UK, some industries are slowly recovering. I'm not sure if it's the case in our industry, because now the furlough scheme is going to change, as they announced last week. And this week, we already started to see some changes in terms of what the companies are actually doing. Because from the moment that they're asked to basically start paying something, even if that something is really just a little. Of course, if their financial situation doesn't change, of course they cannot, or they will have very difficulties on supporting those changes, because their own situation didn't change. So I think for us, and of course we're not alone in this, but our industry, as part of many other industries, is going to suffer. I think this will be the most critical period, and some analysts are saying that the real struggle might be starting now, because a lot of companies will not support this change in the furlough, even though the furlough scheme still goes until the end of October. But from the 1st of August, rules will change and companies will be required to pay something. I don't want to alarm anyone, of course. This might be just fine for a lot of you, and I hope that's the case. But without a doubt, that it's easy to understand why this might not be the case. So again, this is the time to do your personal projects. You have to find strength and I know it's really difficult, because as I just mentioned before, for those of us especially those of us that have kids and they have to stay at home with us, it's really complicated. But that situation, at least in London and in a lot of other countries, especially in Europe, that is changing as well. So there might be free up some time for you to develop the things that you wanna do. Hopefully that's the case. But this is where we are in terms of changes and updates for the overall pandemic in the UK. Technical highlight of the week. I started this a couple of weeks ago, and now I'm stuck with it, I guess. I'm not stuck with it, but I think it's something that it's cool to mention if I come across with something that I thought, or I think it's useful for mentioning here. Why not? I already mentioned here newsletters, and the newsletter from Josh Parks as well. And this week he posted something that a lot of people sometimes tend to overlook, and I think it's very comprehensive kind of article that explains basically what the tech checks are. And what you should be looking at as an artist, and of course as a legal supervisor as well. But this is more for the art. Well, it's for everyone, but it's more for, I was about to say that it's more for the artist to know in advance how to self-tech check. It's very common that in the middle of a production, some things are missed, but I think you should take a look at. If you don't subscribe to his newsletter, you should. Maybe a guest in one of these days in the show, why not? I think it will be cool. And I think that's it for this week. How are you all doing? Let's see what we have. So here in Montreal, it's recommended to wear a mask, but not mandatory. They give them out in metro at least. Well, that's very good. That's not what's happening in London, as we all know. Well, this was like in the news like every day, at least in the UK. There was a huge lack of protective equipment, even well, mainly for health professionals, which is really, you know, the people that really need them, because of course they're in the front line of this battle. And there were a huge problem. I think it's a bit better now, but maybe it's a bit too late. Hopefully it's better, and I think that's the good news to mention is, you know, if it's better, it's better. But I think it came a bit too late, maybe. Hopefully not, and everyone is safe. I already have at least one friend that is a health professional that got the virus. She's fine. But I just got the news, I think it was last week before I traveled here to London. Not sure if that was a reason, but anyway, stay safe and, you know, do probably what you've been doing so far in terms of, you know, those measures and washing hands and all that stuff. That's the best thing to do, even if you don't have any protection. I think it's time now to the tech corner of this week. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. Thank you once again for all the messages and all the suggestions. Really appreciate it, and keep them coming. If you have any suggestions for tech corners, upcoming ones, of course, please let me know. And as I said, I will get back to every one of you. I didn't have the chance yet, but I will. I promise. And let's now change to the tech corner. I hope you enjoy it. Let's take a look at this one and talk a bit more after that. This is something that, I'll be honest with you, I've used it sometimes, but it's not something that I tend to use quite often. But it's useful to know the technique because it can be useful for other things, and we're going to take a look at that. Let's say that we have this camera movement. In this example, it's a fairly... we don't have like a huge angle in which the camera is looking at, and it's not moving like that quickly. But in other situations, if you want to extract or swap the sky, so if you need to do a sky replacement, that would require a few attempts in order to get a background or a new sky in which we would see it throughout the whole camera move. So coverage mapping, it's basically a setup, and we're going to take a look at that in a moment. But it's basically something that allows you to know exactly where to place our sky. In this case, if we want to swap a sky, will be always safe position wise, and the camera, whatever camera we're going to have, it's always going to capture it no matter how fast or how far it moves. So I have mine already in my system because it's something that it's a bit too laborious, as you can see, to build all the time. And what this is I have this camera already because I tracked it from this plate. So first thing to do is to put the camera here, and we're going to take a look at the setup. But the first thing that we have to do is to look at this first projection, and I'm going to talk about it in a few seconds. So we have this camera track, and we can take a look at its point cloud. So this is how far our scene goes. So in order to have the right parallax on the sky, we have at least to go as far as away from camera, given these last pixels as reference, at least. So we can have a sphere that needs to follow that. So let's see our sphere. Let's put this in the scene. So we look at both the sphere and the point cloud. Okay, let's say around here it's already pretty good. So that's how big our scene is. Next, we're gonna put the input camera here, and we're gonna steal, this is just a constant here, and we're gonna steal the aperture, both vertical and horizontal, so we can force the shape of this constant to be the same as our camera. So we're gonna put these two box, and we're gonna force this shape, and we're gonna say 36 here, and then the other one is gonna be 24. So what this gives us is, once we project this to our sphere, we're gonna have exactly the limit of our
frustum from our camera. Okay, exactly those limits, as you can see. So this is our world, this is our camera is moving, and the goal now is to capture every single portion of the sphere from the inside out and see where we see this white bit. But we need to see this white bit throughout the whole frame range. So we need to have sort of a way of combining all these frames together, and the way to do that is with a time echo. Okay, so this is our final output for our coverage map. What I mean by this is you can look at this as the interior of the sphere unwrapped in every single angle. And the way we achieve that is we go to the inside of the sphere, and we're gonna have a camera, which is the green one, that is going to look in this direction, and then we're going to have another one that is going to look onto that direction. We do that for every single direction. Okay, so we're going to have 6 cameras looking on every single direction, and we are going to mix all those frames until the very end. So because the method is a plus, we're gonna add every single frame on top of each other, so we see the entire range at the last frame. If we go to the first frame, it's gonna only mix that frame because it doesn't have any other frames to look at. So in order to have the entire range, you need to go to the very last frame, meaning that we're gonna add all of those frames on top of each other in terms of how the projection will look like on the white bit. And this is why I'm holding that last frame and not grabbing any other, because I want, in this view, I want to know how all those frames are on top of each other. I need to analyze the last frame. I'm gonna do that same process for every single camera, and I'm gonna use the same time echo, and I'm gonna use the same frame for obvious reasons, meaning that in some directions we won't see anything. Say for example this one, we won't see anything. Actually, in this example, the only one where we're gonna see something is gonna be this one, because the range of our camera, it's just big enough for this camera to be capturing it. But in a different situation in which we have like a much bigger range, we could have seen this type of square on other bits of the sphere. And the thing is, we need to combine all of those into a lat long, a new lat long, including this white bit. So in order for us to do that, you can put any format here that you want. I advise you to use something as low as this, because this setup, since this is based on time echo and we have 6 of them, mixing, in this case it's 100 frames, in other cases it might be even more. This is a very slow process, and that's part of the reason why I don't use this that often, at least not for the purpose we're talking about, which is swapping the sky or changing the background. But once we have that, we're gonna label that what's front, what's left, what's right, and this is given by this guy here, which is a square format of a checkerboard that in every single one I'm changing the color and I'm adding the text saying where it's looking at. This is kind of irrelevant, but it helps you to understand what we're doing. And we need to mirror this because we are basically unwrapping at the end from the inside out, and then we need to put this from outside in. That's the way that Nuke textures things, meaning that from the perspective of our camera that lives inside the sphere, we're going to look at this inverted. So we need to then invert that again, but we're going to take a look at that in a moment. So every single square, and it's square because this camera here is looking at different directions, and we're forcing every single scanline render at this stage to be a square format, and we are changing the camera in rotation every 90 degrees in every single direction. So we end up with a square from the inside, that in this case it's the back square, this one is going to be the left square, and so forth. And some of them, in this case again we just have one of them that includes the entire range of our camera in terms of frame range. We're gonna have the white bit, which is where is the range of the camera. In this case it's the only one that we have, the other ones will be empty. So now the only thing that we have to do in order to have a lat long is to combine all of that into a lat long. So we're going to use a spherical transform, and the input and the output will be from a cube input, which is this, to a lat long. That's all we need to do. We define the output resolution. We can always change this, but this is the only thing I have to do. It's important that you mix the right things in the right order in terms of what the Z is and what the Y and X, positive and negative. Otherwise, you're gonna have the assembly all mixed up. But if everything goes correctly, this is the interior of the sphere unwrapped, including where our camera lives, which is this area here. Cool. So this is the range of our camera inside of our world. Now we need to mirror this so we have this mapped correctly, because at some point within this setup we're gonna map this to a sphere again. But we're not gonna include this, we're just gonna include our new sky. By the way, because this is such a heavy setup, once we have this map, I would pre-comp it from here. So that's exactly what I did here. I've pre-rendered this lat long unwrapped version of what's interior of our sphere. And it's important that you render this whatever format you choose. I chose PNG just because I can keep an alpha channel. So we need the alpha channel of this region. So that's very important. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna change the position of wherever we want that to be. Okay, and we can put this over for now, just so we can see more or less where it lives. And the goal here now is to put this as big as we want, but if we cover the entire white area, that means that we're safe in terms of the range of our camera movement wise. So let's say that we have this is our new sky. So this is just for alignment purposes, and then we need to put this like that. And now we're gonna map this to the same exact sphere as we did it above here. So this is our sky. Because we know that the range of our camera matches that place of where we place our sky, we know that with our camera this will always be safe. We will always be looking at a portion that we can capture. So now once we look at it from the camera, we know that no matter how far we are, this is always going to be safe. So now we can have the right parallax because we placed our sphere as big as we needed to. So we know that we're safe, meaning that if we now get I'm going to try to get a lumik here very quickly. It's not going to be perfect, I know that, but just for the sake of example. So this, let's say that this is our sky. Just gonna isolate this area here, and if I multiply that, I'm gonna have that region. And now if I key mix our sky within our footage, we're gonna have something that makes sense with our region. So this way it's always safe. The reason, as I said, the reason why I don't use this that often, it's because the great majority of the times the range that we have in our cameras might not be that severe, and it will take us no time at all just to place a card more or less in the place that we want. But if we need precision and if we need to see some features exactly in a specific place and still be able to capture that with the camera and knowing that we're going to be safe anyway, this is a great way to achieve that. What this is more useful to see is know what's the portion of a certain matte painting that we're looking at with a certain camera. We can steal the alpha channel from here. So that will be the portion, and if you want to see exactly the portion, we can do something like that, and now we're going to see it bit better like that. So this is the entire portion that we're looking with the current camera that we have at the matte painting that was provided to us, and if something is not up to what we need or up to what the client wants, this is the only portion of the entire matte painting that we would have to change. So this is quite handy to do things like this, and it's probably the reason why this is more used. But it's also valid, as I said before, for swapping skies or put a background in the range that we're always safe. A quick way to prove that this is actually the portion of the image that we're gonna see once we map this to a sphere is by copying the camera here, copying the same sphere, and then we can even drop a rotopaint and draw something inside like a cross. And because now we're mapping this to a sphere, now we need to add the mirror. And now if we drop a scanline render, our scene, there's our cross. So no matter of where we put the cross, as long as it's inside this range, we will be always safe in terms of what's the range of our camera. So it will always be there for you. So this is a great way to check whether or not this is correct, this region, and if you need to change something within the DMP, either you change it yourself as a leader, as a supervisor, or you tell them, by them I mean DMP, to change this portion. This is the only portion that they need to change. You are required and expected to be part of a solution, and this is a way to uncover and minimize the work for other departments.
Let's now call our guest. It's time for that. I think you all know him, at least you know his name. Let's call our guest. See you in 2 seconds. Yay! It's Ben. Wow.
Hello,
Look at you,
everybody.
man.
Working this time.
Working this time. For those of you that are watching this not in a live fashion, you should know by now that we had some technical problems. That's why Ben is saying it's working now. For those people that have been sleeping for the past couple of years or 3 years or something like that, can you please tell everyone who are you? Probably people know your name. The ones that have been sleeping for a couple of years probably don't know. So if you could introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure. Well, obviously, my name's Ben McEwan, as the screen says. I am a compositing supervisor at Image Engine at the moment. I've been working in the industry for like roughly 10 years, depending on when you start counting. And I run a little project called Ben's Comp Newsletter, and that gets sent out every 2 weeks and kind of aims to share the latest and greatest in like nuke knowledge and tips and tricks and career development advice and all sorts of things. It's basically what I would have loved to read myself when I was like
Exactly.
in my first sort of few years in the industry, at least, but even now, yeah.
Yeah, we didn't have that when we started, right? Everything was like almost like a secret. What about this technique? Well, never heard about that. But that guy knows. Who's that guy?
Exactly.
It's like a wizard, you know what I mean? I know that you've been there because you just told me, but we started more or less at the same time. So at that time, everything was almost like a little secret. But there's no secrets. I normally say that this is no secret. This is just about thinking about things, coming up with solutions, trying. Most of the time it's about why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? You know what I mean? So, but yeah,
exactly.
Thank you very much for your newsletter. For sure, people are appreciating this effort on your part. We all know that this stuff. These little things, they seem like it's a little thing, but it's not a little thing. This consumes a lot of our time. So thank you once again. Actually, this was sent out this past couple of days ago, right? The last one.
Yeah. The last one was on Monday.
On Monday. So there you go. So for those of you that, as I just said, that have been sleeping for the past couple of years and don't know what we're talking about, please search for Ben McEwan's newsletter. You can put it on the Google and it will show up immediately for sure. So
even
make sure
better, I just sent a link in the chat if anyone
look at
wants
you.
a convenient way.
Oh, look at you. You see, we have a veteran here. I just started this a couple of weeks ago. Ben has been doing this for a couple of years. So that's the difference. Actually, today is App 6, which it's almost 2 months that I started this out of nothing, which and the support has been amazing. So thank you for everyone for supporting this. But about the newsletter, I was about to ask you, how did you come up with this idea?
So the idea came from I kind of made a conscious decision to shift from big studios to more smaller studios, focusing less on trying to do the biggest and best shots on the biggest and best movies I could, and more just like trying to find interesting teams of very talented people to work together with and learn from. I guess the focus was less on working on the big stuff and finding better ways to do things, So part of it came from a little bit of insecurity on my part of like, well, if I'm not doing these big things anymore, are my skills going to atrophy? Am I going to forget how to do it? So it was partly a way to keep all of that fresh in my own mind. But also like I just had this itch that I wanted to like share some knowledge and help other people out. Like I'm super introverted, and I remember my first few years, especially, I would sit around people who had been working for as long as I have now, but I was so intimidated to ask them like, hey, I see you're doing this thing. Can you teach me how to do it too? So
that's so common even this day, and I have a lot of that experiences as well as a supervisor. You know that this person, because you can tell by the way that they look at you, or the way that they look at your monitor or whatever, they want to ask something, but for some reason they refrain themselves to do so. I don't get it. I always say to them, I mean, man, when I was in your shoes, I was like, asking everything that I could. I didn't care whether or not people would look at me differently. What I wanted was the knowledge. You know what I mean? So ask away.
Totally. I mean, I try and interview industry veterans as part of my newsletter. And to that point exactly, I did an interview with Ivan Buskets, who's a VFX supervisor at ILM. A lot of people who have been in the Newt community for a couple of years know his name. And he pointed out that exactly, where I always like to ask people like where they came from and like certain failures that they've had or like lessons that they've learned. And one thing that he brought up was he just wished he asked people more things.
Well, he's a pretty accomplished guy, technically speaking.
He is, and I think that speaks volumes as well. Like,
of course,
you're not born the technically accomplished guy. You get that way from asking lots of good questions,
and from study as well.
Of course,
and I already mentioned this when I was starting out. And I don't want to say this, for me as an example. It was the reality. I can only share my own experiences. But when I was starting out, of course, there are things that you need to do in the job that you're not so, confident whether or not you know how to do it, or is it really this way to do it? And then, you fear that you're going to be, you're going to show things to other people that you shouldn't because you didn't understand this correctly or enough in your mind. And to avoid that, I would go home after a day's work and I would put another 8 hours on top just to try out things. Just on the next day, I will come up with something that will be a little bit more confident. And people like even Busquets, apparently, he shared that experience with you. But he's a pretty accomplished guy, and he still is a huge contributor to all the tools that we normally use every day. Very good documentation as well online. So that's another example, I would say. I mean, for young guys that are starting out, this is how you progress in your career in any profession, not only in this one. So I don't know if you want to add something to that or not. Well, you already.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I guess the main takeaway from that is don't be shy. Like, people are kind and nice. Obviously, there's an exception to the rule sometimes, but like 99.9% of people would be so happy to help. Like, exactly. I very publicly share my knowledge. That's something I enjoy doing, but I think that's a trait a lot of more experienced people have. They might have been doing the same types of shots for a little while, and it's also something fresh for them too, like having the opportunity to help something or help someone else out is always good.
Yeah, it's always good to be in that position, because sooner or later you're gonna need those people, those colleagues, in a different stage of your life. So be kind to each other. Mm-hmm. That's always what I say, because you never know what you're gonna need. And it's not so much about needing this or needing that. It's just being a good person overall, I would say. We've all had our bad experiences, I'm sure, and people probably would refrain to ask and to put themselves out there because of that. But the worst case scenario is, okay, this person was a dick with you, move on. You know what I mean? There's plenty, as you just said, the great majority of the people they're nice people, so don't be afraid of that. And because of this issue, I also know that you are a teacher and a mentor of VES, right? Which was the place where you studied. How was that experience, and
Vancouver
what that
Film School.
Exactly, Vancouver Film School.
I mentored there after hours for a little over a year, actually. A lot of that was just helping students along with their coursework and answering any questions that they had. I'm actually self-taught. I didn't study there myself, but it's very interesting.
I was under the impression that you studied it.
No, I actually wanted to. I remember having a conversation when I was a teenager. I was coming up to my last few years of schooling, like traditional schooling, wanting to kind of dive headfirst into visual effects. And VFS's program was the first one, or at that time, like probably 12, 13 years ago now, at that time, it was the place to go. And we looked at the price, and it was it was just too much,
There
which is
actually,
disappointing.
it's funny you mentioning this. I don't know if you saw this, but in one of these nuke channels, there was like a meme saying, how much does it cost to go into the VFS school? And then the guy just put a picture of a leg and a hand.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I mean, I think school is definitely a good route for a lot of people, but I am self-taught. Like, I made my start making like Star Wars fan films in my parents' backyard with my friends.
Okay.
Then kind of like got into people paying me to help them do visual effects for Star Wars fan films, which is awesome for me as a young guy.
Of course, yeah. Can imagine.
But there was obviously a certain point where I was using After Effects at the time. I knew that the industry used Nuke, so I had to bridge the gap. And like I think of myself as a pretty motivated self-starter, and I could figure it out and get there. But some people aren't like that, and that's totally fine.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and
I
the
also
helping
have that
hand
in
for a
common
school
with
is
you.
worth the money.
Of course, yeah. I also have that in common with you. I'm self-taught as well. I don't have the Star Wars part in common because I didn't grow up with Star Wars in my country. But because my background is engineering actually, and this was a total accident. The way I come up with working in visual effects, it was a total accident. But I mean, yeah. If you're not curious, whether you're in a school or you're self-taught, I mean, there's only there's a certain level that you cannot top because you don't have the urge of knowing more. So if you want to save some bucks and you have that in you, yes, go ahead and study by yourself. Even to this day, it's totally possible. I got a call the other day from a viewer asking me exactly that. What would be my advice? Whether should we go into a school or an online school? And I said, it's up to you. I mean, people are different. Some people need the class to progress because they need that kind of motivation. Some other people don't. But whether you choose one or another, I think you need to have that in you throughout your career, because otherwise you're not going to go, far, right?
Totally. Like there's something to be said about learning how to learn as well, and not in a traditional school setting. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But if you can figure out the way that you absorb knowledge the most effectively, that's going to pay dividends. That's the most important thing you can learn. And I think, like, to a certain extent, if you go to a specialized like film school or art school or visual effects school, you're going to be taught those skills, but you're not necessarily going to be taught the soft skills, which is honestly half the reason that people get their contracts renewed or get called back for a second contract at a studio and stuff like that.
That's a very good point. That's a very, very good point. Yeah. And school that's about personality on one hand. It's about you trying to be a good person overall with your colleagues to start with from a very early stage in your career, I would say, and your mannerisms, all of that. You might think that you're the quiet guy, but all of those things, that they speak volumes on how people perceive you throughout your career, and this is something that will pursue you until the end of your career, I would say, right?
Exactly. Do you have any examples of people you've worked with that have good traits like that?
Good traits like that.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, I think, as you just mentioned, the great majority of the people, they're good people. But there's a lot, especially the young guys, they're really introvert. They refrain themselves to ask this or that, even though I always tell them, ask away. If I cannot, answer your question at the moment, that's because I can't. That's because I'm busy with something else. But I will come to you. But ask, because it's the only way. If you have a question, because sooner or later that will get you. There's bad examples as well, and we all have those. But of course, I'm not going to speak about the bad examples. But generally speaking, I've been fortunate to work with good people in that regards as well. And there are people that prefer, whether I'm not like criticizing or not saying that because you're like this, you're going to accomplish that. You never know what you're going to get. But if you're a good person overall, that thing will be perceived much more than what you think. much more, because all of those soft skills that you just mentioned will speak volumes. But every person is different, I would say, and I don't want to now pass the message that, oh, in order for you to get to supervision level, you have to be really extroverted, or you have to be the clown in the class. No, that's not what we're talking about here. It's more about the subtleties, I would say. And in that regards, I've been very fortunate to work with good people and interested people, especially. What about you?
Yeah, I would say that too. Like, I would categorize myself as a very introverted person. And like, I made my way to be a compositing supervisor
There you go.
eventually.
Exactly.
So I think that kind of proves your point a little bit.
There you go. Yeah.
But yeah, for sure. Like, I've worked with some really talented guys, like people who have been in the industry for 15, 20 years, like can handle any shot, but the headphones on, don't talk to anybody, or when you approach them, they're grumpy for whatever reason. And those sorts of people, like, no matter how talented they are, you generally don't want to be around them, do you?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I've had so many students like that I've worked with where it's their first or second job, and while technically they might not be there yet, I'm so happy to help them because they're so enthusiastic. They prove that they want to learn, or they just ask good questions like, "Here's how I've done this shot. I think it could be better. Can you give me some advice?" And like that kind of back and forth helps develop the person, but also the team.
Yeah,
Especially
of
in
course.
an open daily setting, for sure.
Of course. Yeah. Totally agree with you. And speaking of that, a lot of people ask me, or have been asking me for for years, what about Python? What about how do I come up with Python knowledge? How can I improve my skills in that way? And then I tell them, look, you do this, you do that. This is how I did it. Even though I have a mechanical engineering background, people confuse the fact that because I have that background, my path on that knowledge was like really easy. It was not easy. It was as difficult or as easy as anybody else, because I learned by myself once again. And as probably you also agree with me, the documentation a few years ago, Python-wise, for Nuke was almost inexistent or really confusing. I didn't know what an API was at that time. And I was confusing what the API was and what Python was, and then what's the syntax of one and another. But I also find out that people would like to have that skill, but they don't put the hours or they don't put the effort to develop that skill. And again, by the way, knowing Python doesn't make you a better artist. It will make you a more complete artist because you're capable of doing different things. It will develop your mind, I would say, but it doesn't make you a more visual, accomplished person. What's your take on that?
I agree largely. There's a huge difference between creatively being able to get a shot looking nice and across the line. You do have to have that skill, but I do think Python is an important thing to know. So I kind of touched on it a little bit, that there was a point in my career where I shifted from wanting to do these like big shots in these big studios to just kind of working with a good group of people who can like help push me forward. And I think part of the industry at the moment is like everything's kind of coming together and every client is expecting the same quality. Whereas like it used to be, you had film, you had TV, you had commercials, and every client would be a bit different and they'd all kind of have their own standards, you know what I mean? But now those standards are kind of like getting closer and consolidating, and they all kind of expect a similar thing. So especially as it relates to like Netflix content and Amazon content, if the quality bar is like almost as high, but you're trying to like turn around more and more content, you kind of have to find better systems and faster ways to produce that quality.
That's such an important point. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's where Python comes in, or at least for me specifically, like that's one of the reasons that I thought it was worth learning. And it turns out that it was a great idea, like so much so that I authored a course about it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I was about to plug that as well. Ben has I think you call it Python 101, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah. So yeah, you kind of. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time talking about it, but you did mention a few years ago the documentation wasn't very good. Like, I also didn't know
Confusing,
what an
right?
API was. Yeah, like it is certainly a little better these days, but um, I never really liked the approach of like, if I want to use Python in Nuke, I have to learn Python and then I have to learn the Nuke module and figure out how they go together. I just wanted to know, what do I do in Nuke to get the thing? And it's kind of like taking the most useful 20% of the knowledge and teaching that instead of the whole big intimidating amount, you know?
Yeah. It was quite
Yeah.
intimidating when I was starting out, and probably felt the same because, again, everything was so confusing. You didn't know what to link, a language that can be used for, so many things, and then the things that you would like to do or you think it's possible to do. Some of them might be possible. Some of them might not be possible at all. You have to have a different type of knowledge. So. If there's something that we can help, and you're certainly doing that with that course, I mean, it should be hugely appreciated because for the new guys, if you want to start that by scratch, a few years ago, it was really confusing, and plus you didn't have anybody to ask, or not that many people. So it was like a self-digging kind of a situation that we found ourselves in. So check that out from Ben. And speaking on that subject as well, I can say that even though, and I'm being totally honest here, even though Python doesn't make you a better artist, it contributed hugely, at least for me, in my own experience, to perceive the software in a completely different way and to be more accomplished, or to be like probably the catalyst to become a supervisor, because I could do so much more than just being an artist. And being an artist, of course, it's the core of what we do. But if you want to take leadership roles, of course, you have to think about things in a slightly different way. So for those of you that would like to become a supervisor one day, I think, learning Python, you don't need, what I wanted to be careful about what I'm about to say, which is you can be a supervisor still not knowing Python. Don't get me wrong, okay? But what I'm trying to say is, if you know that, your chances will go up a bit because you'll be a more complete artist, and your mind will develop how to think about things in a kind of different way, more as a systematic kind of thing, more something that you do once and it can be replicated immediately for your teams. So, it might not be something for you, but at least give it a try. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think the way that I kind of like to think about it is, if you're an artist, whether you're like junior, mid, or senior, you're an artist. And if you're a lead or a supervisor, you're in more of a support role. And at that point, you're not just thinking about your own shots, but you're thinking about everybody's shots in a whole sequence. So it kind of like forces you into a different way of thinking.
Yeah.
And any tools you have on your tool belt to help manage that extra workload and like have a better big picture view is always going to help. Yeah, and sure, like Python is one of those things that has helped me personally. But yeah, there's many things there that you can look into.
Project management, for example, hugely important.
Yeah, that was what I really wanted to ask you next. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of artists promoted into a lead or a supervisor role, they come from an artist role,
Yeah.
but a supervision role is less about actually doing the work and more about project and people management. And
completely different thing.
Totally different skill set. You might have so many years of experience using Nuke or working on certain things, but you don't have that other skill set, which is totally separate.
Yeah.
How do you think people should develop those sorts of things?
Well, again, this is where I think, and being completely honest again, I said previously that being, having an engineering background didn't help me to progress or to learn Python, because I didn't learn any language at school, at college in this case. But without a doubt, that for project management skills, being an engineer, that helped me tremendously, because I'm not just a trained engineer. I worked as an engineer, so I was in the field working as an engineer, and of course, engineers think about systems all the time, think about budgets all the time, think about Excel all the time and other tools. So I had that already. Of course, you have to adapt to unique challenges for several reasons, as you can imagine. So you have to quickly adapt, and that's, I think, a key also as a supervisor. And but project management skills, it's hugely important, because it's not about, I normally say that, because people ask me, so do you still do shots? And I normally say, well, sometimes I actually do some shots, but what I can say is I don't do any shot and I do them all, because you have to touch in every single aspect of a sequence or several sequences. You have to study this beforehand so you can tell your team how to avoid certain pitfalls, or don't do this because you're going to encounter this problem, or what you're doing is great but it's not going to fit with what the rest of the sequences or whatever. So hugely important. And also things like doing projections about on how this will be possible to deliver with the team that you have. Simple math, really, but it really helps me tremendously. I think it's on my second episode of this thing that was in Portuguese, because I didn't tell you this, but the first 3 episodes of Lair were in Portuguese, so I would be more proactive on my small community. And on my second one, I showed my master, because it's the only one that I use spreadsheet for how I manage my projects. And there's a bunch of graphics and all that stuff, which is, you can skip that part. It's just more about how to think about things. My intention on showing that was not, oh, look at me with all these fancy graphs. That's not what the intention is. It's more about how you should think about things, and then you can put this on a graph or on a piece of paper. It doesn't matter. It's how to think about things. And also organization, hugely important. Not only within the scripts, like not having like these spaghetti kind of accidents that we all see and know, but more about how to think about things, I would say. But hugely important. So if you want to progress, that's what I would say. If you want to progress to a leadership role, whether it's a lead or a supervision role, you have to be, I would say, you have to be good at project management skills, because sooner or later, when the crunch time hits and you don't know your numbers, you don't know how to help production, you don't know how you need production to help you, So what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think as an artist, you can do quite a lot already for yourself to be proactive about that, to prepare yourself. A couple of examples might be, like I always keep a to-do list of my shots and the tasks that need to be done in those shots. What else? Like just being prepared for that question of like a coordinator or a producer could come up to you at any moment and be like, hey, if we asked you to deliver this one day early, could you do it? Or how long is it going to take you to finish X, Y, and Z?
Or how many people do you need extra?
Exactly. Like all of that stuff kind of extrapolates onto a bigger scale. So if you can do that for yourself, you can do it for a team of people too. Sure, it's like bigger, but it's kind of a similar sort of skill set, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a completely different skill set. And people might think that, we all end up being supervisors coming from an artist role. But that's not necessarily for everyone, and that doesn't say that you're better or worse than anybody. It's just a different skill set that you might like it or you might not like it, because a lot of times as supervisors you have to put up with a lot of things that you don't want to, and that have nothing to do with the artist part of things. It's more about organization and more about the that dynamic between in this case comp or artists and production. Because it's about money, it's about time, it's about people, and people can be translated into how much money can we actually spend or save. So I would say that it's a totally different skill set that might be for you, but it might not be for you, and it's totally fine as well.
I think like it's really important to touch on that. Like kind of when I was around a mid-level, like sort of 5 years experience type thing. Like I wanted to be a visual effects supervisor. I thought like naturally for my career to progress, I have to go through all the levels, and that's the highest I could get. But I met a guy who was at, I think it was at ILM, or maybe it was DNEG in Vancouver. Regardless, um, they'd been just comping forever for like
Yeah,
15, 20 years. And I was like, oh, why didn't you ever have the opportunity to become a supervisor? And they're like, oh, I did many times. I just don't want to. Like, I
exactly.
like doing the hands-on work. And if you choose to do that, that doesn't mean you've stopped progressing, right? It just means that you're wanting growth in a different way, whether that's career growth by trying to solve harder and harder shots, or whether you want to grow in ways outside of work, which is totally valid as
Yeah,
well.
and there's also like a misconception of, and well, personally, and already in this show, I mentioned this, which is, as a supervisor, people think that you have to be, if you're a supervisor, that means, necessarily speaking, that you are the best that this company have ever seen, or the best in your team, technically speaking, or visually speaking, whatever. And yes, you have to be really accomplished. Yes, you have to solve a lot of problems. Yes, you have to be there all the time to support and to give ideas to your artists. But that doesn't mean that you have to be the best. First of all, what's the best? The best in one situation might not be the best in a different situation. And it's more about adaptability, I would say, rather than to be the best of in this show. Your shots look amazing, so you should be the supervisor. No, it's a different thing. Of course, if you can marry those two skills, amazing. But a supervisor is more about pushing people's talents, regardless on how many years this person or that person have of experience, and to come up with a team, because visual effect is all about the team. It's not about the individual, because anyone that has like amazing skills, whether it's in comp or any other thing, and cannot work in a team, it's impossible for this person to progress in this industry. So I think that's a misconception that a lot of people have, like a supervisor has to be the best in every single aspect of the job, and that's that's not necessarily true. Thank God we have other people that are better than us, right, to solve some problems, right?
Yeah, wasn't it like Steve Jobs who has that famous quote about like it doesn't make any sense to hire smart people to tell them what to do. You hire smart people so they can tell you what to do.
There you go.
And I think that's
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Okay, well, it's been a good chat. Let's see. I think there's a question here, which is, who here in the chat would like to become a soup, or just want to become an awesome senior? That's a very good question. No replies yet, though.
Yeah, I feel like it's something, if you're not sure, like that's always okay, of course. Somebody asked me a question of like, I don't know if I want to be a supervisor. How do I know? And I kind of, this is not going to be true for everyone, but this is the answer I gave. I like the metric of like, if it's 9 p.m. in crunch time on a show and you get asked to pick up one more shot to deliver that night or tomorrow, does that stress you out? And if you say yes, you should probably just stick to being an artist, because as you alluded to before, a lot of supervision is more problem solving. And like, obviously you're problem solving a lot when you're doing shots, but when you're managing an entire team and a show and like collaborating with more production staff than you normally would, those sorts of changes happen all the time. And if you're not comfortable dealing with that, or you don't want to deal with that, that's totally fine. But it's something that you do a lot more in a leadership role than you would an artist role, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Of course, as you just mentioned, this is a stressful job, regardless of your role, right? But without a doubt, that being a supervisor is just like, it's more things to worry about, because you have to worry about everyone's shots. And I just mentioned before that you don't do any shot, but you do them all, because you have to study this all of those things in advance. But I mean, it's really about that. And sometimes, and I'm sure you've been there, Ben, as well, correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes things are so hectic that you're like, oh my God, why I put myself into this position? Because things are so confused. But really, very rarely things go that way. At least for me, in my experience, because normally I have like a good group of people to support all the needs, and production is essential here. Production can make or break a project from start until the end, and so the artists, of course. But production is absolutely important. And you mentioned something about like years of experience versus becoming a supervisor or becoming just an artist, and what's the training needed. I think that sometimes, in my experience, and I'm being totally honest here, on the production side of things, because people progressed from, for example, a runner position, which is totally fine, don't get me wrong, but if they don't put the training, or if they don't develop their skills organization-wise and stuff like that, and they just end up working in production first as a coordinator, and then as a line producer, and then finally as a producer. If you don't develop those skills at some point, of course, that will make your life really hard, I would say, as a producer. And I think more times than I would like to, I see people from production lacking those type of skills. It's just because they grew up with the industry in the way that they don't even know how it happened. Of course, they have to be good at what they do at some point, of course. But I think, unfortunately, I see that happening a lot of times. What's your take on that?
I agree completely. Like, I've worked with some of the most amazing production staff, from producers to coordinators, and some who were there just to kind of show up, do what they needed to, and go home at 4 o'clock. And obviously there's going to be different personalities too, but I don't think it's restricted to production. Like, everybody in the team, no matter if you're an effects or comp or whatever, has to be a good team player. And I feel like a lot of that just comes down to being curious and trying to do the best by other people that you can, because ultimately it's collaborative, right? Like, if you have an awesome team, but a production team who might be inexperienced or has other agendas or whatever, things aren't going to be great. But likewise, the other way around, like, I don't want to name names, but I've worked with somebody who, I think they'd spent like 15 years at ILM, and they couldn't roto. And the show just needed some roto help. But
by the way, good. I think it was actually contrary to my convictions. I'm going to mention someone, which is Donald Trump. But he said something that it was actually interesting, which was, a lot of experience doesn't mean good experience. It might be just bad experience. You know what I mean? So when you see someone with 15 years of experience, yes, in your mind you think, oh, this guy or this girl or this person, should be, and I'm expecting this person to be awesome at what he or she does, right? But sometimes that's not, because especially when you combine big names of companies that these people worked for, and you just mentioned one. You have these illusions, or, well, sometimes illusions, yes, but you have these expectations, high expectations of these people. And sometimes that doesn't mean anything. And then it's like a deflated kind of, situation that you find yourself in, right? Like when you look at this person in a completely different kind of way, which is not fair also, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I personally worked with so many amazing artists in Australia, and when I was younger and less experienced, there wasn't too many opportunities there. But some of these people are kind of tied down to Australia. Like, they have kids, they have like a mortgage and stuff. Even if they want to try and travel the world and experience different things, their life might not allow it. But some of them are still some of the best people, like the most talented artists I've ever worked with across all disciplines. First, like, people who have the opportunity to travel around. So yeah, I think it's you make a really good point. It's less about years of experience and more about how committed to bettering yourself you are.
Of course, yeah. Years of experience, yes, it's important, but that's not the beginning and the end of anything. So don't be if because especially young people, right? Because this is a difficult job, as we just mentioned, and young people might think that, oh, I have to have 10 years of experience and I'm just starting out. When will I have this opportunity? Is this really going to happen? My take on it is, do the best you can possibly do, and those things will appear naturally. Right?
I agree.
Forget years of experience. Skip that part in your mind.
I get asked quite frequently from people like, hey, I'm a junior, how do I go to a mid-level? Or I'm a mid-level, how do I go to senior? And my response is exactly what you say. I kind of tend to forget about the title and look at people from the years of experience as kind of a decent indicator, but it's not everything. Like if somebody's been working for, like you say, 15 years and kind of just does the job and goes home, and then there's someone who has half the experience, but they're really driven and they're curious and they want to learn more, I value that second person much more. And whether they're junior or a senior, on paper, it doesn't really matter.
Doesn't matter at all. I've met the most talented people and to be honest with you, the more talented, it seems like it's a trend, the more talented I encounter people, the less years of experience they seem to have. Mm-hmm. So think about that, for those of you that are starting out now, think about that, because years of experience doesn't mean anything, or doesn't mean everything, at least. Cool. Time now for our note fight. People have been asking for this. It should be interesting. I already, a few minutes ago told you more or less what it is. I'm just gonna fire this up, and hopefully everything's gonna be fine. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right, cool. Okay, the clock is ticking, all right? By the way, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just an answer, okay? I'm gonna start with a simple one, all right? Black's match.
I can't give a one-word answer because there's a gizmo I love. It's called toe reverse, and it lets you set the midpoint of a toe wherever you want.
Okay, so it's more about the toe. All right, cool, all right. Prom aberration.
I like Tor Andresen. Sorry, I'm murdering your last name. I like his FXT chromatic aberration gizmo.
Okay, cool. Glow.
My own BM optical glow.
Cool. Additive keying. Might be a node or a process.
It depends on the shot. I have about 5 tool sets saved. And I can't remember the name of any. You put me on the spot there.
Okay, do you want to skip? That one?
Let's skip.
Okay. The spill.
I like Adrian Puyo's APD spill.
Okay. Matching grain.
Dust grain. Nothing else but dust grain.
Okay. Retexturing. In Nuke.
Oh man, that's also hard. That depends on the studio and whatever render engine it is. But generally, I like being able to unwrap stuff with a scanline renderer.
Cool.
And but yeah.
All right. I'm gonna mention something. Last week, people still talk about to this day in the Discord channel, which is fake subsurface scattering.
Fake subsurface. Oh. If you have a subsurface thing?
In 3D.
Yeah. Well, you just plus in the subsurface and boost it, right?
Without the pass. You have to create your own.
Without that? I would try and do something like a diffuse pass and a Fresnel pass.
There you go, folks. That's a good answer, I would say. Okay, one last one?
Yeah.
Last one? Okay. Okay, what's your take on doing a lightning bolt?
I'm embarrassed by this, but the first thing that came to my brain was open After Effects. Don't do that. Isn't there a gizmo called like X Tesla or something?
Yeah, there is. Yeah. That's your answer, yeah?
That's my answer.
Cool, yeah, people are clapping. Nice, you'll see what I'm talking about afterwards. Cool, man. Thank you for playing along. I think people enjoyed it. And thank you again for doing this. Again, everyone, if you don't know who Ben is, you've been asleep for the past couple of years because your newsletter has like a couple of years, right? Or more than that, right?
About 2.5 or so.
2.5 years. There's a lot of useful information every 2 weeks, so make sure that you sign up for that newsletter. And we should all thank people like Ben to come up with those ideas and to put all the effort and the hours, because this stuff takes us hours to prepare. Even though it's just a few lines of text, that's not the end of the story there. So thank you once again, Ben, and thank you for doing this twice, almost twice. And let's see if people have any questions or any last words for you. I don't see anything, so I think it's time to wrap up. All right.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Ben, no problem. Will you come back if I call you again? I'm just messing around with you. I'm messing around with you, man. All right. Thank you. Thank you once again, everyone. And I'll see you. There will be, even though this is the the repetition of what happened on Friday, there will be still a new one coming this Friday, which will be 2 days from today. Okay, this is a special event. Let's call it like this. All right, cool. All right, Ben. Thank you once again, man.
Thank you.
Bye bye.